So hello everyone, it's a pleasure to be with you here today, this morning, and also a pleasure to welcome Laura and Antoni to our discussion here. So as Daniel mentioned, the Principles for Responsible Banking, they were launched back in 2019, so 4 years ago at the UN General Assembly. We've started with 130 banks, a little bit more than 130 banks, and this network now has more than 320 banks in 80 different countries. So it's a very diverse network of banks that are really committed to transform their business and to align their portfolios to deliver on society's needs, of course represented by the Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Agreement, and the local and the regional challenges and contexts where these banks operate. So it's my pleasure to have and open this discussion today with Laura. And Laura is the Group Head of Sustainability at Barclays, and Antoni Ballabriga, Global Head of Responsible Business at BBVA. And just before we start, I just want to highlight what the principles entails very quickly. So the principles, as I've mentioned, they are meant to help the banks to have a framework to align their portfolios with the society's needs. And then we have 6 principles. So one is strategic alignment, knowing your impact and setting targets, working with your clients and supporting their transition, engaging your stakeholders, building up a governance structure and an internal culture that enables transformation, and finally reporting and being transparent on the progress made. So every bank that signs for the principles, they are committing to build this infrastructure, as we said, to really deliver a real-world impact. And I think we've discussed some of the progress, but also some of the challenges actually in the initial panels here. And this is what we are going to discuss. So how is this happening also in BBVA and Barclays? And I'm also going to bring some data. So next week, in 10 days, actually, we are going to publish the second progress report on the principles. So it doesn't cover the full year, the full 4-year journey of the banks, but it does give us important data and important figures, actually, for us to understand the progress made, but also some of the challenges ahead. So thank you again, Laura and Antoni. And we are going to start with some discussion on strategic alignment and also governance and culture. I think we've heard also in the panels here the importance of having that integrated, having sustainability and social environmental concerns integrated into the business strategy, and both BBVA and Barclays already did it. And also the importance of bringing this discussion to a strategic level at the board's table as well. So Tony, can I start with you also? So how was the process actually of changing BBVA's strategy, bringing this topic to the board's table? Can you share a little bit with us, please?
Okay, thank you, Karine, and great to be here. Congratulations to UNEP 5 for the work that you are doing. It's fantastic. Well, yeah, that's the first step that we did. No, in fact, when we signed the principles as a founding member in September 2019, we already had a plan, which was called Sustainable Commitment Pledge, our Pledge 2025, with certain goals at that time in terms of climate and sustainable finance, and also in terms to align our lending portfolios with the Paris Agreement, and that was approved in 2018. But the fact is that when we approved internally the principles, we had the opportunity to embed this issue, into this critical issue, into our strategic planning that we had at that moment. No? So in fact, we had the opportunity to move further. No? We recognized that we have to make a lot more, and we saw that process, and so we embed sustainability as a strategic priority, as Carlos explained before, into our strategic plan in 2019. So it became part of our strategy. We moved in a certain way from a great plan with that commitment to really a core component of our value proposition and of our business strategy. No? That's the main shift that we did in 2019. No? And some key elements of that process, I would say the first one is that we saw this as a business opportunity, as was mentioned before. Obviously, there is a compliance issue, but and a risk issue, but we understood that the opportunity is there as a financier. Secondly, we realized that we want to have intentionality in our impact. So instead of using the famous SDG framework to report, we have to use the SDG framework to see where we have greatest business opportunities, greatest impact, and try to use an ex-ante the SDG tool framework instead of ex post. No? I think the intentionality was absolutely critical at that conversation that we have with the leadership and with the board at that moment. No? Then we realized in that process that we have to upfront the three different challenges that we have. No? We focus initially on climate and inclusive growth. Later we have also add nature, as we have seen, obviously that is absolutely critical. And then obviously we had to decide to focus, because sometimes if you want to transform the bank, you have to focus at the beginning, otherwise you are not going to make change. And we initially focus on specific SDGs or specific areas in terms of climate, in terms of inclusive growth, and that helped us to mobilize the change. No? Then we have evolved, but that was absolutely critical at that moment. No? And finally, to have clear goals, as I mentioned. No? So the governance was critical. Carlos has explained a little bit. No? We have to work at the board level. We understand that this is an issue that is so critical for the bank and for our clients and societies where we operate, that all board members have to be prepared to challenge the management on that and to make the right oversight. So it's not a question only to add a board member specialized, although we have done it, specialized on climate, that's fantastic, but we need to train the board, that's pretty critical. And we have obviously, let's say, spread the responsibilities of this topic across the different board committees that we have. So we have to embed this as a business as usual. No? So, and then at the executive level, I was explained before, we have created an area. Today we have a core team, global, but most importantly, we have an extended team with all areas, support areas, business units, engaging a lot. In fact, we have codependencies from the business teams to the global head of sustainability. So in fact, we have, let's say, the business reporting to the head of sustainability, because we are totally convinced that this is absolutely a business issue. And we have already aligning incentives. No? At the end, we have realized that we start that journey on the strategic dimension in 2019, but we realized that we have to work a lot to make sustainability as part of our business as usual. No? And this is what we are going to do now. Yeah.
Thanks, Tony. Laura, is it similar? Was it different for Barclays?
Well, firstly, thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here in Madrid, and I really congratulate UNEP FI. When I think as a founding signatory 4 years ago, there were 30 banks. Now it's grown more than tenfold, and more than half the banking assets in the world, and really led in many ways by the European banks. So I think it's a fantastic accolade to the UNEP FI team to see the progress to date. So yeah, I think for Barclays, I like to think sustainability has been part of Barclays long before my lifetime, never mind my role in Barclays, because it's a 330-year-old bank. And I think if you don't have a heritage of that length, unless you've always adapted and met the needs of society as those needs change. But I think formally, Barclays was involved with UNEP FI for many, many years before 2019, before becoming a founding signatory. But I think what really happened in the course of becoming a founding signatory to the principles is we really started to integrate it in a much more formal way into our governance and into our decision-making. I call it rewiring the bank, particularly with climate, but more broadly across sustainability. So one of the really defining moments for Barclays, it was one of the first banks to pass a net zero, a shareholder resolution, actually done through a binding shareholder resolution, what we call a special resolution under English law. So that's a binding obligation on the bank, and we set a net zero 2050 ambition and a commitment to align our financing to the goals and timelines of Paris. So that set a very clear North Star for the whole of the bank, and it's great in my role because it gives me a very clear mandate, both from the board, but also from the overwhelming majority of our shareholders. It was some 98% or 99% of the vote in 2020. So that set a very clear direction for the bank. And then the task is really, how do you embed it in the governance, in the decision-making processes? And that's an ongoing and iterative journey, always overseen and led from the board and the Group Executive Committee. One of the things we've done is to set up a lot of additional infrastructure to support that. So we now have a board sustainability committee dedicated to leading on sustainability for the board, a dedicated executive sustainability committee, a climate risk committee reporting into the group risk committee. So really creating that additional capacity and infrastructure in the organization. And then, of course, a lot of focus on setting establishing impact, which we'll talk about some more, but then setting real targets and being very transparent on our progress through our disclosures. And then a lot of it is also culture change. We've actually designated this month Sustainability September, so I'm very glad I'm not in the office today because I have a feeling my picture's going to be up on various billboards and screens around the office. But continuing to help people in the bank understand the bank's objectives and the journey we're on, and then most importantly, how do we help our customers and our clients? So really investing in building capacity. We've hired a lot of experts into the bank, but also really importantly, we need to reskill and develop the confidence of our 80+ thousand colleagues around the world to really play a leading role in this as an institution.
Thank you so much, both. And it's really interesting to see all the internal changes that are happening. And I think one thing is that, okay, we have 2 international big banks here, but if we look to the network and the progress reports that we are going to launch soon, almost 70, so the great majority of the banks, they've established sustainability strategies, or almost 70% of the banks that are part of the principles, they integrated sustainability in the core bank's strategy. So if you go to their reports, if you talk to them, almost 70% of the banks have integrated. And also in terms of governance, the great majority, so 90%, also have set a governance structure that is linked to the board or the CEO, and also depending on how actually the bank operates. So I think, one key thing is that the principles, they can fit to different sizes and different business models and different countries as well. And you've mentioned something now, Laura, also in terms of impact. So my second question is, one key element of the principles is really for the banks to understand the potential impacts that you have through your portfolio, both positive but also potentially negative impacts. So this is a key step for the principles. We see now that more than 80% of the banks that are part of the principles, they are doing their impact analysis and disclosing the results of the impact analysis. And almost 90% of the banks have climate change mitigation as, of course, one of the significant impacts, followed by financial health and inclusion. You've mentioned also, Tony, the concerns about nature, circularity, so other topics that are more nascent, but also, coming into the agenda. Laura, can you share a little bit of this, impact discussion? How do you understand and, the strategically discussions that goes, when you really face the portfolio?
Yeah, thanks, Karine. I think there are a number of processes. There's no single magic tool that you can put all the bank's data in and it will say these are your high impact areas. So we use the UNEP FI impact analysis tool as one key methodology. We also use the group materiality analysis using the approaches of the GRI and SASB to look at, if you plot on 2 matrices, what are the issues of greatest impact and importance to our stakeholders and which are the ones with the most material impact to the bank, and that helped with a prioritization. And unsurprisingly, climate mitigation was really in the top right-hand corner, and therefore was our first area of impact assessment and target setting. But I would say it's an ongoing process. We've been doing a lot of work this year on social risk and human rights impacts, so conducting a saliency assessment with internal and external stakeholders, and a lot of stakeholder engagement, and we cover that in quite a lot of depth in our external reporting. And that's ranged from a lot of shareholder engagement. A real milestone for us was last year we had a Say on Climate, a shareholder vote to approve our progress and targets, an advisory vote this time. But before and after that vote, we engaged very extensively with shareholders, but other stakeholders, civil society, to understand what were the areas of greatest impact from their perspective and ensure that we were addressing those. So there were quite a number of inputs to the process, and then a lot of discussion at the board and at the executive committees about the process of target setting and how we linked those to impact. And one of the very important outputs for that, which was Barclays as a global investment bank as well as a UK domestic bank, chose to measure its impact in climate and set targets, including our capital markets financing activity. So that was an example of really trying to be cognizant of the broad breadth of our impact and reflect that in our target setting and in our processes.
Thanks, Laura. Tony, you've also mentioned that it's important to have a broader view, but also at some point to focus as well, because we can have massive efforts, but without reaching like real-world impact. Can you share BBVA's experience on discussing and understanding impact?
Yeah, well, as Laura said, no, this is a learning process. An impact assessment is absolutely critical, no, to help to inform your strategy and your decisions in terms of opportunities and also on risk management impacts. So what we did in 2019 when we approved the sustainability as a strategic priority, obviously we did an impact assessment, let's say more high-level assessment, and we arrived to the conclusion that climate from one side and financial inclusion from the other side were the two areas of our greatest impact, considering that our footprint in an emerging economy is absolutely critical. No? And we have already set targets on climate for a lot of sectors. We still have 2 or 3 sectors that will be published in the next months. But also we have set targets on financial inclusion. No? We have a target to mobilize, to engage and to support 4.5 vulnerable micro entrepreneurs in South America. No? So in line with the commitment of financial health and inclusion that is also promoted by UNEP 5. But this is a learning process. What we have done more recently is we have also used the UNEP 5 impact tool. I fully recommend to use this fantastic tool that provides us the best possible response to the materiality assessment that we are going to have to do with the new reporting standards. So we have read there the methodology, and obviously it's again improved in each version. So we have learned a lot with this more, let's say, more holistic approach to impact. And then we have to focus, as you said. In some cases, we start working more in specific areas where we have realized that we have to focus. For instance, in nature, we are focusing now in water. Water, we see that we have largest dependencies and impacts and obviously risk, no, from our clients. For instance, we have made an impact assessment of water stress in power generation. We have done, thanks to the Anchor tool, again, also with the Aqueduct database from the World Resources Institute, and we have mapped 7,000 plants from our clients and check what is the resilience in terms of water stress. And we have realized that practically 23% of our exposure is in high risk of water stress. So that's the examples that we have to do in order to learn and to iterate. And I would say that it's not a one-stop shop. I mean, you have to work and iterate and start as soon as possible because you are going to learn a lot in the process.
Thank you so much, both. So we didn't agree that they're going to, sell the tools and methodology. I'm joking. So Tony, I think, to your point also on engaging clients and understanding they're better. And you've, both BBVA and Barclays are also part of the Net Zero Banking Alliance. So for these banks, so almost 90% of the banks that also, prioritize climate change mitigation, half of them are part of the Net Zero Banking Alliance, committed to reach net zero emissions by 2050, so aligning portfolios with a 1.5 trajectory and pathway. So you both, as you've mentioned, you both have intermediate targets for 2030, you have sustainable finance targets, but you also have transition, plans and tools and engagement already with your clients. So maybe starting with you, Tony, can you share actually the actions and how do you put and you take the target and put that into action? You've mentioned something in terms of governance and engagement, but can you share a little bit more?
Well, this is the real challenge. The challenge is not to set targets. I mean, setting targets is challenging, but the real challenge is to deliver and to have the right impact. And as it was mentioned in the panel before, we have to move the whole economy from brown to green. We have to help, not to reduce our emissions, finance, or facilitate it. We have to help our clients to reduce their emissions. And that means investment, and then this advice, and that needs to be there. So that's very important because, as was said, we are the middleman, and we depend a lot. We can comment later, but this is absolutely critical. No? So how to operationalize these targets into our day-to-day business, And so the learnings that we have in this process is first, we need tools. I know that a lot of banks, we are all developing our own tools to assess the climate resilience of our clients, especially if we focus on transition risk. In our case, we call it transition risk indicator, using not only the information reported by clients today but also having a forward-looking idea of what our clients are or will be in terms of CapEx, in terms of technologies, in terms of regional footprint. We understand, and we, at the end, arrive to a score that help us to take decisions, and we use that score for our credit decisions today already, in those sectors that we are setting targets. So I think it's important to have tools. Also, we are developing a new tool that is called What If. It's a nice tool where what would happen if we agree in this loan, approve this loan or this other loan, and how will affect to our portfolio. So that type of tools is important. The second idea is that we need to have sector plans in those sectors to understand better how our clients are and how we can guide in these advisory services that we have to provide to our clients. Obviously, we have to write the right governance. We decided to create a specific governance for alignment. We have a steering group of alignment that really oversight the delivery on those targets. We think that it's very important to have the accountability and ownership of these type of topics. I remember a comment by Carlos in a leadership meeting when we approved the strategic plan in 2019, and he said when we finished the presentation, hey guys, this is not going to be Antoni's issue anymore. This is your issue. So that's simple as that. So we need to have accountability from everybody. In this case, for the targets execution is absolutely critical. And obviously, the most important one, we have to engage with our clients. And that's that we are obviously training our teams to have a rich engagement with our clients, not only on climate, but also on ESG topics in general. So we cover human rights topics or issues that we may have in one client or we can put on the table. So engagement with the clients, because at the end of the day, we depend on them. Our success relies on what they do. And so that's the reason why we understand that this is a key measure. So that's some learnings that we have when we have to execute and try to embed these targets into day-to-day business.
Thanks, Tony. And Laura, Barclays also has a very ambitious financial target that is really also, to support your clients. Can you share your experience on delivering the climate targets as well?
Yeah, I think very similar to what Tony has done in BBVA. So I always think of it as 4 levers, and it's absolutely focused on how do we support and help our clients to transition, because that is, as Tony said, that is the only way we as institutions will achieve our strategies and objectives. So I think of it as 4 levers. We have policies. They're the bluntest tool, if you like, but they set some clear red lines. We call them the no-fly zones. There are some activities that are simply not compatible with a transition to net zero. So we're very thoughtful about where we use those, but we do set some clear lines. The second, of course, is the sector strategies and sector targets. And in that, it's really important as we set the targets, we really think about what are the dependencies in that sector, what are the policy dependencies, what are the technology shifts that need to happen, and what is the deployment of finance that will be needed to enable that sector to transition. So that brings us to our third lever, which is deploying finance. So we've set like BBVA, we thankfully exceeded our initial target many years earlier. It was 150 million of green and social finance, and last year, we set a new mobilization target of $1 trillion between 2023 and 2030. But we also have a separate 500 million target to actually invest directly into early stage companies, into clean technology, to really help them to scale more quickly. And that's not to really try to be a venture capitalist or investor. It's trying to identify the companies that are bringing solutions that will help the rest of our client base with their transition. So, for example, one company we invested in makes smart air bricks that allow ventilation into houses and into buildings without heat loss. So those are the kind of very practical innovations that will be needed to help decarbonize the housing stock, which the UK has some of the worst in Europe in terms of its energy efficiency. So we have our policies, we have our sector strategies and targets, we have our target to deploy finance, including equity investment, and then we use our risk tools. Risk is really important as well. So we really embed this through our risk frameworks, through our credit risk appetite, because that is how you embed it into the core decision-making of the organization. And then, like Tony, I'm very pleased that Venkat, our CEO, has ensured this is, a leadership for all the executive committee members. It's not my responsibility, and it's formally embedded in the public disclosures for the executive directors 20% of variable compensation, of which 10% is specific to climate, is linked to sustainability and non-financial measures. But now all of the CEOs of the businesses, the COO, and the CRO and so on have this embedded in their own performance measures as well. And obviously they then cascade it through their leadership teams and through their organizations.
Thank you. Very, very interesting. And I think we've both you've both raised also, other topics and the interlinkages also between. So we are, of course, discussing a lot on climate, but I think in the prior panels, we also, discussed like the need to have a just transition, need for adaptation, nature concerns, and everything. So I think, Laura, starting with you, and I know this is a concern also on how you deliver the targets as well. So what are we are all learning on that, right? So what are your initial thoughts and actions to trying to build these interlinkages and, see the impacts, how they act together?
Yeah, well, we participated in one of the UNEP FI pilots for the TNFD, and I know we're going to be talking about that a bit later, so I'm not going to cover it too much now. But like BBVA, we've created, we call it our CTF, our Client Transition Framework. And for all the counterparties where we have set sectoral targets, we've created an evaluation framework. And that is a combination of quantitative questions around targets, whether they're 1.5 degree aligned, but also qualitative, is there a border-proof plan? Is it embedded in compensation? And this allows us to give all of our clients a score from 1 to 5, and that will help inform our decision-making. One of the things we have done is integrate into those questions just transition. So is the company's strategy, the client's strategy, incorporating just transition considerations? At the moment, we don't put a scoring or weighting on that, but it's really to help us understand how our clients are thinking and engaging and how that needs to inform our own decision-making. So that's just one example of how we're bringing in the broader considerations. In other sectors, for example, agriculture, which is one where we're doing our sector transition strategy and baselining of emissions this year, obviously nature and land use is absolutely fundamental to the transition of that sector. So we are incorporating into our thinking and planning, how do we think about the nature aspects and aspects like water scarcity, biodiversity loss in our development. And then a really interesting area is how do you start to think about building this into proposition. In the UK, the government has brought in some legislation for house builders of a certain scale where they're required to demonstrate biodiversity net gains. So how do you think about reflecting this in the products and services, and how can you help perhaps landowners or farmers participate in a market of biodiversity net gain? So we're starting to also think about it in the products and propositions and advice that we can give to clients.
Thanks, Laura. Antoni, in your case, you also mentioned that you're not just looking to climate, but also like a broader view when you engage with clients. So what are the initial discussions at BBVA looking to the interlinkages?
Well, yes, they're interlinked, obviously, and it's not easy. In some cases, maybe you may have specific financial solutions for our clients that are focusing on one specific area, but in some cases they are connected, no? And if you want to help the agribusiness sector, you have to, you may tackle the 3 challenges at once, no? So I think that's the approach that we are having. So we start, yes, focusing on climate, on decarbonization, but what we have done is use the avenues that we are creating, like the transition risk indicators, as I mentioned, or the sectoral plans that we have. We are step by step including the just transition angle and the natural capital angle, no? And so if thanks to this exercise that I mentioned before in the power generation regarding water scarcity, so we are now informing our sectoral plan, and we are now starting to assess our clients, including also this key issue for them, no? So what we have seen is that there are so many common areas that, especially between nature and climate, that it's being more productive and efficient to not to have double conversations, but to have one single conversation, and use the ready processes that we have changed due to climate, and see how we can embed in that rails, no, the nature discussion, no, instead of creating an additional conversation. That's what we have learned. As I said, we are focusing now on water, but obviously, because this is the impact assessment we have done, but obviously more will come. So that would be maybe the recommendation that I would like to share. No, especially when you go down, maybe to leadership, it's good, but then we go down, down, down. It's more difficult to make things moving if we have too many conversations at the same time and getting everything very complicated. So in order to simplify, you have to use the same avenues to work all at once in a certain way.
And at the end of the day, the client is the same, right?
Yeah,
and the impacts are all happening at the same time.
And if you have to engage with the client on decarbonization, why not you put on the same agenda?
Yeah.
Oh, you have this water issue, or you have this forest issue, or you have this human rights topic that we should discuss or we know. So this is the conversation we want to have, and we are having already with our clients. No?
Excellent, thank you. So I also want to use the opportunity here because you're both very engaged, not only in both banks, not only within UNEP, but in a number of initiatives. And we are also discussing now what we call the PRB 2030. So what's the vision actually for 2030 for the group of banks that are members of the principles? So I wanted just, to have your views also from a broader perspective. So not only on BBVA and Barclays, but looking, to the context. So since the launching in 2019, what do you think, changed in terms of the context and how do we operate and integrate sustainability? Key successes, but also, some of the key challenges that we have ahead. So I want to use your, knowledge also to a broader perspective here. Tony.
I go first. Okay. Well, I remember perfectly well when we worked as a founding member with the principles 5 years ago, and I'm sure that those 23, 24 banks that we were there, we couldn't imagine in the best dreams we could have to have an event like today here with 4 chairs of relevant financial institutions, with the discussions we are having worldwide and so on. Obviously, there's a lot to do, but the speed is incredible. I mean, and so that's good news. So, and I would highlight 4 pieces of the progress. No, were the first one, and then the challenges. Obviously, the first one, the progress around I think we have worked quite well. Lot to do, but in terms of frameworks, standards, tools to help the financial institutions, in this case banks, to embed sustainability into our business strategy. So this is something that today we are very well prepared compared to that moment in 2019. No, the second progress is the collective action. So I remember when we signed the Katowice commitment in 2018, Katowice together with 3 other European banks. To align our lending portfolios with the Paris Agreement, to a commitment to develop methodology and so on. And now we have the Net Zero Ranking Alliance and providing clear signals that the middleman is ready to go. Okay? Now we need governments, we need each one has to play its part. No? So collective action and leadership, I think that's important. It's absolutely necessary. It's not enough, but it's necessary. No? The third great progress is about the role of government supervisors. This topic is on the agenda. No? Also, I remember a meeting I had in the ECB. I see Patrick and that 4 years ago, nobody knew about this topic, and we were invited to share what we are doing. And now it's impressive what we have and the mandate they have and the process. And so this is something good and also good progress, no? In terms of the sustainable finance regulation agenda. No? And the last good progress is about good steps in terms of energy investment, for instance. Today we have already $1.7 per dollar between clean energy and brown energy, according to the Energy Internal Agency. So that's good. And also in financial inclusion, we have moved from 1.7 to 1.4 billion people in the world without access to a bank account in the last year. So things are moving, but obviously we need more. So the challenges, first, I would say what is mentioned on the panel before, we need more ambition from governments. We need more clarity about the policy in terms of offer, also on demand policy. We need clear signals. We need this reform of the World Bank and support to the emerging economies, as was mentioned. So we need leadership from governments because, as I said, we are the middleman. So we cannot be leading this process. We need that to provide signals to our clients. We need also to, I would say, simplify, if it's possible, the regulation, sustainable finance regulation. It's getting too complex, probably. And we need incentives as a scale, as also was mentioned, no? To mobilize this innovation that we need. No? The third challenge, I would call it this politicization we have in certain areas of the world, especially in the US. which is not good. So we need less ideology and more pedagogy and education on the topic. And the last challenge is about greenwashing. This is also a topic that is very relevant to provide the credibility that we all need. I would say greenwashing and also greenhashing, okay? Because we know quite well how to manage greenwashing, so some regulation is coming, so will help us to reduce the greenwashing risk. Also, we have standards coming that will help us. Also, we have good practices in the banks, frameworks like the NCBA. All these pieces will help us to mitigate the greenwashing. But the greenhashing is also a very relevant risk, and we don't know how to manage, okay? And it's very important because we need a collective action, and we need to give signals to all our stakeholders that we are ready to go. And if greenwashing is here, maybe we have some risk in terms of systemic change that we need, no? So I close here, sorry for the long explanation, but I think that these are quite relevant challenges, but well, again, quite optimistic. No?
Good to see the optimism. Laura?
Well, I think that was a fantastic summary. I think, without repeating them, I think just a few things to add. I think, firstly, I think seeing a lot of voluntary standard setting starting to move into being codified in regulation is a very important step, because I think that helps build consistency. Although I really, applaud the efforts of my bank and all the other banks in developing methodologies, I think it's somewhat unhelpful to the users of the information when there isn't always consistency of approach. And that's not a criticism. I think that was a natural need to get moving and get going. But I think the more we can adopt consistent ways of accessing and disclosing that information, the more useful that information becomes to inform decision-making and ultimately the allocation of capital. So I think that's a positive step. I would echo Tony's concerns on both greenwashing and greenhushing. I think one of the really powerful drivers of the progress we've seen in the last 4 years is the opportunity to learn from each other, is the collaboration. Barclays has published white papers on its methodology, really genuinely wanting them to be critiqued, but also to share that knowledge. And we've learned a huge amount from our peer banks who are often ahead in other parts of the sustainability challenge. So I think anything that prevents us from disclosing and sharing that knowledge and that information will be really unhelpful. And I would really echo the point about the need for clear and consistent signals. One of the troubling things we are seeing at the moment is what feels like a wavering from some governments on some of the commitments as some of the costs come up against the cost of living and the energy security issues that we're also facing. And my view is when businesses get very clear and consistent signals, they're very good at innovating and investing. But lack of clarity and lack of certainty are very inhibiting to those investment decisions, particularly as these are, quite long-term decisions, and this is a very capital-intensive transformation. This is not, just technology, but it's all the hardware that needs to go with it. So I think that consistency of signal and consistency of policymakers' commitments to their own national goals and NDCs is incredibly important. Because as the chair said earlier very eloquently, and as Tony has said, as banks we can then support and facilitate that, but we can't create the investment case or create the project. And some of these things have to be solved at an infrastructure level. In the UK, we're starting to see EV chargers installed around the country, but they're not connected to anything. So they're not much use if you're trying to take your car on a long journey. Or even worse, I've heard that, I haven't seen it myself, some are connected to diesel generators to generate the electricity, which is somewhat undermining the point of an EV transition. So, I do think that clarity of policy, clarity of investment thesis for the businesses will then allow us to deploy capital behind them. But I think there are optimistic signs as well. You may have seen the report from the IEA this morning saying they think that we will, come to peak fossil fuel use and demand and therefore emissions in this decade, which is not soon enough for 1.5 degree line, but a very important signal. I think the rate of EV adoption has been really tremendous in the last couple of years, and I very much hope we're at that stage where we're beginning to see the exponential curve accelerate. So I think there are some, grounds for optimism. And the final one I would mention as a challenge, but also an opportunity, is data. So it's hard enough for us as institutions and for large corporations to access reliable data, and we know that non-financial data is not yet of the quality and reliability that we're accustomed to in financial data. One of the things we're working with through the GFMA is a common data resource. And I do think finding ways, particularly for smaller businesses, to access data, but also to provide data in a less onerous way is a tremendously important thing for us collectively to focus on and help to solve.
Thank you so much, Laura and Tony. I think some of the things that you've brought now we will discuss during the 2 days. So I really thank you for participating, but also thank all the banks actually that are part of the network and are in this journey together with us. So thank you. Enjoy the days. Thank you.
Thank you.